Okay, so I want to talk for a second about Aoki Sims because she was in. So she wrote an article or something for Blavity today that was about how even though she graduated from Harvard, she is now deciding to become a model, and so. Um, it kind of brought up basically a ton of topics like basically about like fashion and like why people would choose to go into fashion even though they basically have a college degree. So there's like an assumption basically like that if you go to college and you pursue academia, that there's something special about you. And if you go into modeling, there's something special about you. So I'm just going to speak from my own perspective here to start off to like give some context. So, for a very long time, I have done a lot of work to understand what it means to pave your own way. Now, I think that really good examples of this that you could look into are there's one of, I think it's Madonna's children. I think it's like her daughter. Her daughter, like Madonna basically cut her children off once they turned 18 so that they would have to go out into the world and build their own path. If you actually look into what Diddy did with his children, it's very similar. Like he gave his children access to like Final Cut Pro and like Logic. Like he bought them a subscription to it, and like they were still invited to his events and stuff, but they really had to go forage, like build fans for themselves among their peers. Like they did not, they like he didn't just give them like all access tokens into music, and Madonna did the same thing with her daughter in fashion. Now, so let's go back for a second. So Aoki Lee Simmons is the daughter of Russell Simmons and Kimora Lee Simmons. Now, Kimora Lee Simmons was an Asian model. She was like in the Usher video, the 7 o'clock on the dock, I'm in my drop, whatever song that is. She was in that music video. She was, she was like a pretty decent model around the same time when like Naomi was coming up. Like she wasn't huge, but she was a pretty model. Anyway, so, obviously like Aoki Lee Simmons grew up very privileged, very like wealthy, like, Russell Simmons is rich. There's not like another thing to say. Like she's super rich. So, with all of that money, you can definitely invest some of that money into academia if you so choose. And we see this again with like Yara Shahidi, where Yara Shahidi is like Nas's cousin. Even though like Nas, I don't know for a fact, but it does feel like her family paved their own way, in media and entertainment. And so, like they weren't necessarily like living off of like Nas's money. I think Yara Shahidi's dad was like a photographer and her mom had some other job, but in this case, so it looks like Aoki, she got into Harvard when she was like 16. That's actually pretty impressive. Like even if you have like legacy status, getting into Harvard, like it is really hard. So that's a pretty good feat. That definitely means that she's very smart. So she says she's setting the record straight and shutting down the age-old stereotype that a person cannot possess both beauty and brains. I think that's really important. She recently uploaded a TikTok that was centered around addressing a question left by a viewer, which read, "You're so articulate and obviously educated. How come you chose modeling?" And she says, "I think that what you are really getting at is, why am I going into a field that doesn't necessarily require a degree or require a whole lot of book smarts when I have a lot of education?" Simmons began, immediately getting to the heart of the comment. She says, "I love it, and I think we should normalize liking something. You don't have to do what you're immediately good at," the 19-year-old said. "You can be good at something and not want to do it forever, and you can be bad at something and still pursue it." That's a really great point. Upon answering the question, Simmons focused on a more significant issue with the comment. I really want us to move toward a future where young women aren't being asked this question, like being asked, why did you follow your more creative passion even though you're smart? So I want to say this because I hear this a lot around the Berkeley campus. Like, people who attend this university believe that they're like so much smarter than everyone else. Now, this is where the sort of like academia comes. I have to give it like a full stop for a second, because like anything, you can train to be smart, right? Like, you can figure out what your learning style is. You can figure out really good study habits. You can figure out a schedule that ensures that you are mastering like concepts, and that will basically lead you to academic success. And that is good. It's great, really. And but it's a skill like anything else. The more you stretch that skill, the more you practice it, the better that you get. So like in the same way as modeling, well, it's very different, but in terms of modeling, if you actually are the best version of yourself, then you could be a model somewhere. It's just that most people are walking through the world, especially in America, as not in a state where they're not the best version of themselves. And here's what I mean by that. The big idea behind modeling, and I've talked about this multiple times, is like they're trying to get like the most attractive people from all the groups represented in magazines and in fashion, so that it can influence the other people in society to like do something, to like maybe watch a film, or to buy something, to buy a lip gloss, to buy a makeup kit, to start to eat this, to do that, to work here, to say that, right? Because beautiful people have influence, right? So, and also, you know, like, people like to look at beautiful people. Now, I think in terms of Aoki Simmons, I feel like one of the reasons that she's choosing to pursue modeling over academia is due to like representation. So, like I said, Aoki Simmons, her mother is Asian. Her mother is also more of like a white looking Asian. She's kind of, I mean, she's definitely darker than like a Chinese or a Japanese person. So she's kind of like an Asian of color. And this is another, I've talked about this a little bit more in other yeah, I think I made some YouTube videos about it, but maybe I'll make a more clear one. But like, darker skinned Asian people, especially women, are struggling with identity, particularly in America and really like globally, because globally they are an extremely oppressed group. Like Asians of color all across Asia are all very, very, very poor. The wealthy people in Asia are white skinned Asians. So this is where colorism plays a role globally, where like people just do not have respect for darker hued people in other cultures, like in Asia, really. And this is why, you know, people in Africa still believe that like skin bleaching cream like means something or is a good idea, just because they've been kind of like brainwashed by other societies to believe that that has something to do with like globalism or who you are in the world, when it's just not the case. And so I think Aoki Simmons has a really good platform right now, or she can make a lot of space for herself, because there's a growing population of dark-skinned, you know, Asian women who are actually beautiful, but they are also not black. And so I think that when I think about like, so, okay, another thing, let's go back for a second. So Kimora Lee Simmons created a clothing brand. It was like a clothing and, it was just like a hip-hop clothing brand called Baby Fat. It was very popular in urban communities. I wore Baby Fat growing up. It was great. So many women of color grew up. The whole point around Baby Fat is, you know, you can, in terms of like fashion, it was very like haute couture, like high fashion, which dictates a very slim European look. So curves are not in. But baby fat was like, okay, I want to make something where you can be fashionable, but you also have curves. So that was the idea around baby fat. Now, Aoki Lee Simmons is going into high fashion. Like, she's walked some Paris catwalks, and like her look, she's very slim. So I think what her aim is basically to try to make a name for herself in the same way that maybe like Aaliyah Kibidi, who I've made other videos about, that this is like an Ethiopian supermodel, or like Naomi Campbell. I think Naomi Campbell, she's like Black American, but I think she is also from Kenya. Like, I think that's what her like ethnicity is. And so like we have, and then there's like, Tyra Banks, the Black American model. Like, we have so many examples of like really, really gorgeous, Black models, like in fashion, man. And then now you have like Mona, and you have on the cover of Vogue Paris now, you have Iman Haman, who's representing for Morocco. That's like North Africa. So what I'm saying is like a lot of the African models who are brown, right? So these like the brown Black girls or whatever, they're like literally representing their ethnicity and their nationality. And so in terms of culture, that is like putting on the map for those spaces. But if you actually look around, who is putting on the map for Blasians, like Black Asians? There's actually no one. Aoki Lee Simmons is like the only person. And that's another thing that I have to be clear about here when we start to unpack Blackness, or, brown girls. We're not all the same. Like, I might have the same skin complexion as Aoki Lee Simmons, but our bone structure is very different. Our hair is different. Our eyes are different. We literally do not have similar blood. We're not the same. And so, like, I am African, and like, girls who probably follow me, or like I look very Brazilian, right? So I don't look Asian at all. But she like is actually Asian. So in terms of like the sort of like influence that we'd have, like we have a very different demographic, and I think it's something that people are not pointing out yet, and they kind of like need to, because we don't do this. Our culture is very different. It's very different. Like, I don't think we listen to any of the same music. I don't think we go to any of the same spaces. Like, we don't run in the same crowds. Like, we are very different. And so I do think that I think that she can make a lot more cultural impact as a model, especially, I think she's very intelligent. She's like a Harvard graduate. I think she can understand how culture and society are important, especially for her ethnic group, which is extremely marginalized in America, because there's just not that much representation of Black Asians or Blasians. And then also in Asia, there's basically no representation. Like, all of the media that you see coming out about who an Asian is and what an Asian is has to do with white-skinned Asians. It's like Chinese and Japanese, and that's not a bad thing necessarily, because like I want to see Japanese stories and Korean stories and Chinese stories too, but I also want to see Filipino stories and Cantonese stories and Laotian stories. Like, I want to see all the stories, so not just one. And that's where I feel like someone like Aoki Lee Simmons I think she should come in and tell her own story. So that's just kind of like my opinion on that.